What is the strangest thing you've witnessed someone do in public? I moved to a town which had a bit of a bad reputation. The first thing I saw when I was bringing boxes in was a man walking down the street with a bunch of plastic bags on fire. He was holding it like a lantern and was so casual about it despite flaming plastic dripping onto him. Actually like the town though, it's got character. Once saw a man standing next to an extremely expensive looking home jump headfirst into a hedge, pull himself out, look at the hedge, and jump back in head first. He continued to do this for a while until someone nearby asked him if he were okay, to which he responded with, "Don't worry, this is my hedge, I'm just bored." Still to this day I respect his casual not giving a fuck vibe. Standing in line in a store at the mall when I hear a weird sound from a woman's large tote bag that is also slightly moving. Could swear I heard a quack. Couldn't be though, except it was. She saw me looking at her bag confused, so opened it and showed me that she had half a dozen ducklings in there. She said she had errands to run and couldn't leave them in the car because of the heat. Made sense, but I think carrying around half a dozen baby ducks in a bag is pretty strange. Right in front of my house, a couple of guys stopped their car, left it in the middle of the street, and began a fist fight. Then after a couple of minutes of each of them throwing more or less ineffectual punches, they both stopped and got back in the car and drove away. It's that last part that makes it so strange. If an argument had proceeded to blows, then I wouldn't just get back in the car with the other guy as if nothing ever happened. I was riding the Paris metro one day when this middle-aged man sits down about half a car down and is non-stop streaming the most foul, vulgar curses in French at no one in particular. Then suddenly, he hiccups, puts his hand to his mouth and says, "Oh, excusez-moi," and, after a second, resumes his tirade. I had to turn around and hold my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. I was in a bathroom stall the other day when a little boy, maybe 6-7 years old, goes in the stall beside me. He sits on the toilet and starts humming some made up tune. That was already a little funny but nothing uncommon. Then he starts aggressively humming louder and louder. It gets to the point where it's almost just shrieking, and then he suddenly stops because he's out of breath. 2 seconds later I hear a plop in the toilet and he then begins singing hallelujah, hallelujah, I just pooped in the toilet, and repeats this a few times. I was almost passing out from trying to hide my laughter. I used to work night shift repairing broken down trains. One night I was called out to a train parked up on a siding in the next town. So I went to the job, made the repair, and was sitting in the driver's seat chilling and smoking a cigarette before heading back. Alongside the siding, over a fence, was an industrial estate with a bunch of units. There was one apparently working, and a loading bay door open. I saw a security guy come out of the door and stand there looking out for a minute or so before he started dancing. The dancing grew into a full-on Michael Jackson style routine with moonwalks, etc. No music. He maybe had headphones. Just this guy dancing away on his own in the night. That was unusual, but sort of okay. But he then stopped dancing, lied down on the floor and started rolling sideways back and forth. Maybe 5 times left, 5 times right. Then he got up and went back in. I can see he got a bit carried away with the music on his headphones or in his head or whatever that led to the dance. But I don't know what the fuck the rolling about was for. I live in NYC, so that might be cheating. But there's a guy on the UES who cosplays as a baby in a pretty interesting way. He'll walk down Fifth Ave in the 60s and 70s pulling a wagon with toys, and every few blocks he'll upturn the whole thing, throw a tantrum, toys everywhere, crying, fists pounding, etc. After a few minutes, he'll calmly put everything back in the wagon and do it all over again. Years ago I used to work doors as a bouncer. Had one bloke walk up the road towards me well into his cups, 1 step sideways for every step forward. You know what I mean. Spot the pub, spot me, and do the old straight arm march that every bloke does when they are trying to hide their intox level. Marches up to a hand's breadth away from me, stares over my shoulder at the door. Evening, so I say. No response. Not tonight, so I say. He finally looks at me, slurs something like why not. I state the obvious. Ooh, he ain't happy with that. Goes on a full minute tirade on how the world was against him, that every bouncer he's met tonight has been a cunt, and that I was knocking him back cause he was Corey, Aboriginal, for Eusebius Riordan. As he's ranting, he's shrugging out of his clothes, and by the time he's done, He's stark bloody naked on one of the busiest streets in the city. He then holds a finger up, like a one moment kinda gesture, then projectile vomits on his clothes whilst trying to maintain eye contact with me, finishes, looks back at me, gives me the sup upwards nod, then strolls down the street stark naked. Reversal. The best place for us as teens on a limited budget was to visit buffet restaurants and stuff as much pizza in our faces as we could. Our favorite place took a long time to clear tables, so we would just move tables after we got seconds. This one time, we finished our first plates, went to the buffet and went straight to the second table. An older couple sat down by our first table while we were getting our seconds. We finished and as we walked by our first table, I grabbed some food off my original plate, munched on it, and looked at the lady. She was frozen in mid-cringe, horrified. Her eyes were massive. Her mouth was at an odd angle, and she just glared at me. It didn't strike me until after I left that she had no idea that was my plate and just assumed that I was a child monster living on the streets eating other people's slobbery leftovers. I brought my kids to the ocean. Long drive but we started early, and as the kids enjoyed the ocean for the first time, a middle-aged woman wearing a uniform of some kind walked by carrying a large, about the size of a small suitcase, cardboard box. She stopped and stared at my kids. It was odd, so I said, "Excuse me, Mom," and she wheeled on me and started shouting in some foreign language. I had no idea what she was saying, but she sounded pissed. She was literally spitting as she yelled at me. My kids noticed and ran back onto the beach. Then she shook this big box at me and there was a dull thud as whatever was inside banged around. I dashed around her, grabbed my kids by their hands and jogged away from her. I looked back and she was still standing there. This was at a state park, so there were no houses anywhere near there. Weird. First, let me say I think this is strange in an awesome way, not a bad way. There's a man in the city where I live. I don't know what he used to do for a living, but he got injured and is now on disability payments from the government for the rest of his life. He was so grateful to the country, the community, the people, who's taking care of him now that he can't work at his career, that he went out and bought a bicycle and cleaning supplies. And now he cycles around singing merry songs and wishing everyone a lovely day while going from shop to shop asking if he'd be allowed to wash their windows as a thank you for his welfare checks. Super strange and super awesome. I've talked to him a few times and he'll be the first to state proudly that he is in fact strange. He just thinks we need more strange people in the world. Like, he'll see someone sitting on a bench just staring at the ground and he'll bicycle right up to them and ask if they're okay. Look up, my good friend. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, and it's a lovely day. He won't pry, he'll just point out some positives and wish you a lovely day before breaking into song as he pedals towards his next shop window. One day, I was heading back to my dorm after class and heard a noise up a tree. I looked up and saw this squirrel holding 3/4 of a very big hamburger. My college campus had its share of fat squirrels, appropriate because it was in Wisconsin, but I had never seen one with such a huge amount of food. I stopped in my tracks and just watched as this squirrel proceeded to scarf down the burger. A friend of mine that was leaving the dorm approached me and asked what was up. I just pointed up and we both stood there watching this squirrel devour this burger. It wasn't a person, but it was still one of the strangest things I've seen happen in public. It was in Oceanside, California. That Marine Boot Pirate Bar. Saw some big dude just start beating this shit out of some boot Marine. Like bad. I was thinking I was witnessing a murder. It was like 3 p.m. Plenty of other Marines were there and were just looking like me. Anyways, this boot that was getting his face pounded into the concrete just started waving his hand in defeat. Dude stooped, pounding him, gave the boot Marine a hand up, and they just walked back into that bar together like it was nothing. Blood was still on the streets, and everyone just carried on like it was normal. I think it was just kind of normal that made it so an unreliable memory, especially for 3 p.m. No cops showed up, I believe. I was just getting out of the movie theater and getting my hair cut, but nobody really said anything. Me and my friends were kinda shocked, but wanted to get in line for the haircuts before other dumb Marines did the same. I saw a kid take a shit in a ditch at the park once. I was on a bench and the kid, maybe 9 or 10, looked at around suspiciously and hopped in the ditch. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see any of his lower body while he was in the ditch. He then ducks down in the ditch and all I can see is the top of his head for about 5 minutes. He then hops back up and climbs out of the ditch, still looking around to see if anybody noticed him. I pretended not to see him and looked down at my phone. Out of curiosity, I casually walked over to the ditch he had been at just to see what he was being so secretive about. I look in the ditch and, lo and behold, there are two fresh humongous turds with some leaves and grass brushed over them in a terrible attempt to cover the evidence up. The park didn't have a toilet, so I assume the kid just decided to let loose there. It was the grossest shit I'd ever seen, both figuratively and literally.